Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to join Senator Corker in his observation that our ranking member has a silver tongue. And I mean that as a compliment. Silver-tongued devil. Number two, this is an observation. I'm not looking for a comment. We haven't had a recession since 2008. So from one point of view, our too big to fail banks have not really been tested. And I would strongly encourage, for what my opinion it's worth, that we tread very carefully before we lower capital and liquidity ratios and start fooling with the leverage ratio until we see how our banks do in a real full-blown recession. But that's not what I really wanted to ask you questions about. Would Citigroup have survived the meltdown in 2008 had the United States Congress not provided it capital?
I don't know the answer to that question, Senator, but obviously it was under extreme financial stress.
How about Bank of America?
I would have to take the same position.
Okay. Did any person in senior management at Citigroup go to jail as a result of the meltdown in 2008?
I'm not aware of anyone.
Okay. And I believe the American taxpayer provided Citigroup somewhere in the neighborhood of $475 billion in capital and loan guarantees. Does that sound about right?
That sounds about right.
Okay. Let's suppose that a senior member of management at Citigroup had been investigated in 2008, and an FBI agent showed up at his or her house and said, "Hey, I want to come in and look around, but I don't have a warrant." And that Citigroup senior manager said, "Well, look, man, I've got a Fourth Amendment right. You can't come in here without a warrant." Do you think other banks should not do business with that senior manager at Citigroup because he exercised his Fourth Amendment right?
No, I do not.
Okay. Let's suppose that senior manager had been subpoenaed to testify in court, and the senior manager took the stand, was sworn in, and said, I've got a right under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution not to answer questions, and, I don't mean to upset anybody, but I think I want to use that right. Would that have been illegal?
No.
For him to take the Fifth Amendment?
Yeah, I'm not speaking as a lawyer here, but I can't imagine that it would have been illegal.
Well, trust me, it would have been. Okay. Do you think that other banks ought not to do business with that senior manager at Citigroup because he exercised his right under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution?
That wouldn't be my personal decision, no.
Okay. Let's suppose that a customer wants to exercise his First Amendment right to speak out against abortion. Do you think banks ought not to do business with him?
On that basis alone, that wouldn't be my personal view. As a supervisor, could have a different. As a supervisor, I'm not sure it would be my role to direct the bank on that question, okay. But that wouldn't be my personal view.
Let's suppose that a customer wants to speak out in favor of a woman's right to choose. Do you think a bank ought not to do business with him?
I would have the same view. I wouldn't think that the bank should refuse to do business. As a supervisor, given my stress that we should not be second judging managements and directors on what business lines they choose to go into, I'm not sure it would be my role to second guess it, but I personally would not do it.
Would your answers be the same if the subject were climate change as opposed to abortion?
Completely.
Okay. All right. Well, as you know, Citigroup and Bank of America have decided to make gun policy for the American people, supplanting the United States Congress. Citigroup in particular says it won't do business with anybody that sells guns to people who haven't passed a background check. They won't do business with anybody who sells guns to someone under 21, who sells bump stocks, high-capacity magazines, all of which are permissible under the United States Constitution. Would that position violate state and local age discrimination laws?
I don't know the answer to
Well, if
that
it
question.
did, and a federally regulated bank was in violation of state and local law, would you do something about it?
If a bank is violating local law, we have a responsibility as the supervisor to.
Okay. Citigroup says that it won't do business with anybody that sells guns to someone who doesn't have a background check. Under the NICS database system, you can actually buy a gun without a database. If your name, if the FBI doesn't give you an answer within 3 days, you get to buy the gun. Mm-hmm. And then they keep checking, and later on, if they find out you're not entitled to the gun, they come get it. So if Citigroup's position violates federal law, would you have something to say about that?
If there were a violation of federal law, yes, that's part of our role as supervisors.
All right. I've only got a couple of more, Mr. Chairman. In Arizona, in Alaska, in Wyoming, you can carry a handgun without a permit, concealed or unconcealed, under the United States Constitution. Mm-hmm. Do you think Citigroup ought to stop doing business in Arizona, Alaska, and Wyoming?
Well, that's a pretty fraught question, because as a supervisor, I think that their decisions.
Because I'm going to get cut off.
Okay.
But I don't mean to be rude.
No, I understand. Of course, I understand.
I think you're doing a swell job. In Kansas, in Vermont, you only need to be 16 years old to purchase certain guns. You think all the banks ought to pull out of Vermont? What do you think Senator Sanders would say?
Well, I know what Senator Sanders would say, but those are issues, I think, that, again, as supervisors, I am trying to stress that we should not substitute our judgment as to what geographies and business lines banks go into.
Well, what I'm trying to stress is we don't need red banks and blue banks. We don't need banks that will only do business with people who voted for President Trump. We don't need banks who only do business for people who voted for Secretary Clinton. We need banks that are safe and sound and honest, and that appreciate it when the American taxpayer puts up billions and billions of dollars of their hard-earned money to keep these banks from going belly up. That's what we need. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.